The opening shots have been fired in the latest battle over introducing a carbon tax in Australia. It's led to some uncomfortable and unedifying scenes inside and outside Parliament. But the really tricky part, of course, will be actually setting a carbon price. Agricultural emissions won't be taxed, but that's not to say agribusinesses will be unaffected. And while the political response is largely driven by community concern about climate change, the recent weather patterns are a timely reminder of the issues farmers face on a daily basis.
Like the weather itself, the extraordinary range of conditions across the continent in the past year means different things for different people. For some, the extremes amount to climate change proof. For others, it's a return to seasons past. This recent Melbourne conference brought together scientists and farmers, so each could learn something from the other.
It's very important in a very unemotional way to tell them what the science is doing in terms of what the trends are, temperature, rainfall patterns, telling them those trends in a very, as I said, a very unemotional way, and then how we can adapt to it.
He's also a member of the Premier Science and Research Council.
Peter Whipp's a beef producer near Longreach, and he rates this the best season he's ever seen. The very notion of climate change is a difficult sell to people who must deal with the weather day to day, not decade to decade.
Where we are in Western Queensland, I mean, our climate, is that variable already? Over the last 100 years, we've had droughts, floods, you name it, we've had it, and like our management really has adapted to that.
Peter Redding is just finishing a stint as CEO of the Grains Research and Development Council, which uses grower and government money to fund its work. Peter Redding, with government so uncertain in their response to climate change, what do you tell growers when they challenge the GRDC spending money on this area?
Firstly, it's about telling them they are already doing a great job, they're really understanding the drivers. So it's really about saying, OK, we have climate variability, there is climate change, but they've already done a great job in terms of adopting and mitigating it. Now, this is where it's going in the future and how we can help them address those issues going forward.
The climate change proposition of a warmer, drier future for grain growers quickly turns into an equation about productivity, doing more with less. You stressed profitability and productivity. Let's take productivity. What's going to drive that in the future, and just how important is it?
Well, a farmer's profitability is made up of two things, his productivity and his terms of trade. Now, on the productivity, there's a number of factors that drive it: farm size, the outputs of R&D, etc. So what we're doing and analysing is, what are the key drivers? Where can we make most difference? The great growth in productivity we had in the 80s, 90s, a lot of that was driven by the development and adoption of minimum tillage, the use of grass herbicide. Now we're saying, what are the farming practices and hopefully the genetics coming through that can help get that productivity up? To be sustainable going forward, our productivity levels have to be greater than about 2% per annum. We're not there now, we used to be, and it's about really focusing the attention among all the researchers, the investors, with private and public capital, about how we can get that productivity up to that sustainable levels of over 2%.
What's the potential in grain production to increase farm profitability through value adding?
We've done quite a bit of research looking at where those potential opportunities will be. Australian grain, primarily at the export level, will continue to be used as a part process for milling. There are value-add opportunities in terms of specialty wheats. We're looking at doing work with high amylose wheat, which has impacts of high-resistant starch, which helps in things like health, colorectal cancer, etc. We are just working with CSIRO about commercialising omega-3 in grain, so that's a major advantage. However, the research so far shows that those opportunities, although significant, probably in themselves, each individual case, is probably not more than about 500,000 tonnes. So the key driver is still going to be in Australia. A lot of the export in terms of the Eyre Peninsula West and making sure that quality of the grain is good for those markets. On the East Coast, a lot of it's about domestic production and intensive livestock production, and we're doing lots of work there in terms of understanding what are the feed values of grain and helping have suitable varieties to also meet that sector.
You also stress the importance of making research and development really accessible for farmers, but how do you do it?
Well, this is a very critical part of the whole equation. There's no use just doing the research and moving on unless that research results in an output, either a service or a product for adoption to use. It's not achieving anything. In Australia, growers use consultants. Probably the latest survey, about 44% of Australian grain growers use their consultant. So it's making sure that consultant has the outputs of research and development and that he can translate that into how he passes it on to the grower. That's the first thing. Secondly is how we communicate directly with growers. Growers under 35 want all their information online. Growers over 55 want it all written. In the middle, you've got to change. So it's packaging the outputs. It's really about professional marketing of R&D.
Conference organisers brought several dozen farmers to tell their stories so scientists could hear from the people their research is meant to help. And for beef producer Peter Whipp, there was a lot to absorb. Peter Whipp, what are you getting out of this conference?
It's really good to see what is happening. You know, like there's some really good stuff that's happening, some practical sort of on the ground stuff. You know, like there's like a really good project with, breeding bulls for reduced emissions. I reckon that's really exciting. And some of that stuff, even some of the stuff there with consumer sentiments, how consumers see things, that's really good. But some of the other things are a bit, not scary, but seems that the research is still in a lot of ways not that well connected with reality, or with on the stuff on the ground, I think.
So what's your view about climate change?
Not being a scientist, I mean, somewhere along the line we do have to look at what the science is telling us and make some intelligent decisions about that. And there's a lot of science out there that's saying things are changing. Whether that's a 200-year trend or whether that's the way it's going to be, I really can't give you the answer. But for me, I'm still going to adapt my business to what is coming along anyway, and that means if, where we are in Western Queensland, if you're not preparing for drought, well, that's almost a no-brainer. It's going to happen.
What are the principles that guide the way you run your beef operation, and how do they relate to climate change?
A lot of what we do is based around efficiency. We're trying to run our beef business efficiently. So that means for each kg of beef we produce, we want to minimise our costs, so that's the economic side of it. And when we look at it, so there's sort of a win-win, because most of those adaptations we do for economic efficiency are actually also carbon friendly, like they're reduced emissions, or producing more beef for the same amount of emissions, those sort of things. So like the things that we've changed is about managing our pasture differently. So we're looking at like a rotational and spelling program to sort of build the health of our pasture and actually make more efficient use of sunlight. Looking after ground cover, like that for us in Western Queensland, ground cover is the key. Whether you think there's going to be climate change or not, ground cover is the key. It makes you more profitable, and it also helps you be more resilient to, say, more extreme weather events.
Next week, some of the science that might help Australian agriculture adapt.
People are experimenting with crops that are now called nitrogen use efficient, or NUE. And some of these have shown the capacity to maintain yields with conventional cultivars with only half the application of nitrogen. So the implications for this in agriculture are wide-ranging.
Building carbon from the point of view of holding on to water and making more of the water that does fall accessible to plants would be one way to modify the soil to help combat against any future drying that might occur.
Soils, nitrogen and genetics. That's next week on Landline.